It's 12:01. We've got a recording for anybody else who wants to listen later. Roland, good seeing you. Stephen, great to see you. Everybody, thanks all for being here. Sam, go for it.
Yeah, well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Sam Pack. I'm one of the IRC team members. Really great to see all of you. I hope you had all good summer off and go back to swing of things. And today we are going to like to update and share what has been happening over the summer within this group. Share a little bit about projects and some of the product, and spend most of our time discussing crystallizing more specific priorities in our interest, research, education, and clinical domains. I'm going to quickly go ahead and kind of remind ourselves, why do we exist? What's the aim of this group? You know, we started a little bit of like a grassroots level, but now we're a collaborative, and we really do want to promote this sense of community within informatics and rehab. And that one of the ways that we can do this is not just talking about informatics, but how do we actually put this together into more of a product of projects and bring resources and connecting one another. And that's why we all share, we have a shared understanding and common goal in that perspective. And you might be wondering, well, where is this structure organized and orient ourselves from and to? And this group is housed under TechSig of Academy of Leadership and Innovation. We do have a steering committee, and I think we'll likely to kind of morph as we continue to grow together, but we have a great representative, and I see some really new faces that I have not met you. So I look forward to continue this relationship and building community with all of you. I'm going to stop, as I mentioned before, some of the products and some of the development that's happened over the summer. And one of which is the creation of resource housing website. So I'm going to hand it off to Madeline Matosa. Should I go ahead and unshare this, Maddie?
Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to share until, yeah.
Actually, let me just make Madeline a co-host, and that might address it too, just to make sure.
All right, can everyone see the web page? All right,
Yes.
so this, we basically wanted to create a page where we could bring all of these ideas and people together in a place where would make things a little bit more organized. So this is a site that we created, and basically this is just a home page that tells about the group. We have a people page. We sent out a Google form. If you filled that out, except for 2 people, which I have to add, which were added recently, you will be on this page, and it's basically a place for us to see everyone involved with the group. If you didn't send a picture, you just kind of look like this icon now, but I can add pictures in if you want to change your mind with that. But essentially it shows who's in the group and sort of what area they're currently practicing, working, doing research, or educating in, and just sort of gives an understanding about who's involved with this. This is a resource page, which we hope will continue to grow as we develop resources and have them. But this is the slide deck from the presentation from last CSM, and hope to add to this as we go. Place where we can collaborate. These are folders within the informatics Google group, which essentially, filling out the form, I add you to that Google group, and then you have access to all those communication platforms. We can collaborate on documents in that space, etc. And then here is sort of the calendar of events. It will have all events, all of these meetings will be on there. And then if there are any other events that are related to the topic of informatics, we can add them here so that we kind of have a space to share what's going on. And that's about it. It's just sort of a general introduction to this site. Does anyone want to look at anything more closely or just kind of leave it like that for now?
Nice job with that, Madeline. I think it's got a nice look, a nice soft feel. It's simple. So yeah, you did a nice job with it.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and stop. And I do have a little video recording that I can, we can share that sort of runs through that if you want to see that again, or if anyone missed that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madeline. And those of you who haven't put in your profile, please do so that we can get connected a little bit more specifically with your expertise and your skill set. I'm gonna go ahead and turn next to Bob.
Before you do,
Yep.
if we can, Madeline, the people page right now, it's only accessible to people in the group. Am I correct with that? Just so everybody's aware.
Yeah, the whole page is currently private to people in the group. There was discussion about whether we were gonna
Mm,
change that, but it hadn't been quite determined yet. So right now it's still private.
And that's just an FYI for everybody here. If you are looking for somebody else and you know that somebody made a comment about something on one of the calls, it's another place just to find that individual and talk more. Or if you want to send out something to everybody in the group, it's a place to do that too. So,
And I maybe missed something, but do we have access to that link already? Or am I the only one who doesn't know how to access that at this point?
how about if we put it in the chat? Oh,
Yeah.
look
Great,
at that.
thank
She's
you.
already stepped.
Perfect.
Thanks.
I put the link in the chat, that's to fill out the form, and then once you fill out your information, I'll be able to add you to everything.
And once they're added, do you have the link to the page in case they've already filled out the form and can't find their way back, just so everybody has that as well?
Yes, let me put that in there right now.
Thank you, Madeline.
And one quick thing to add, I think that we're looking for, see if there's any concerns about actually making that public. Do people have concerns about their name and face and information being on a website that's a little bit more public? I think what we'll do going forward is on the form is just let people check whether or not they want their information public on the website, because I think it probably makes the most sense to actually make this website a more public facing domain. Anybody have concerns with that?
First, so we can make it we can put that as a disclaimer. If you do, then we'll put you on the back end, not put it in
Yeah.
the public facing. Yeah.
You can have access to it, but we won't put your name up there.
Yeah, just FYI, that link that just got posted is throws a 404 error, so it's a bad link.
All right, let me, if you're logged in, because it's private still, if you're logged in under a different website that I put you in on the Google group for, it'll show that, if that makes sense. 'Cause right now, only you have access through the email. When you filled out the form, it said like, put your contact email and then put the Google group email. You have to be
Yeah,
logged.
it doesn't even give the opportunity to log into any Google account. So I'm not logged into any Google address. I'm logged into my, well, I can't from this one. So that might throw some people off. Because right now it doesn't even allow you to log in with any account. It just throws an error.
Thanks
might-
for mentioning that, Chris, and Madeline, thanks for checking that out too.
Yeah. Why don't we send out a fresh link just to make sure after this call, and so that all of you have access to it, and making sure that we get that rolled forward. Mhm.
Or if in between now and then, if somebody does get a fresh link, then just put it in the chat for everybody else too. So a couple more updates, just so everybody knows, we did get accepted for CSM for a proposal that we put in. And basically the proposal is around careers in informatics. There were, and I don't have the proposal up in front of me, sorry. But I do know that that is the topic, and the idea is basically to talk about some of the basically people who have positions in informatics to be able to talk about how they got into those roles, and et cetera. And I'm sorry, I just don't have it pulled up right now. Kelly or Sam or Matt, if anybody else has that up, that's fine, just to read more.
I'm gonna put that on there. So it's really the title is Beyond Clinical Practice, Career That Matter, Health Informatics and Rehab, to be more official.
And then the second thing that I did want to share with everybody is that the APTA House of Delegates was this weekend. And I'm not sure if anybody else was in DC for that, but one of the motions that did come up and there was a bit of discussion around, and it was related to digital health. It did pass the House. There was a little bit of modification to one of the bullet points, but outside of that, it passed as it was put forward. During that discussion, as well as during a couple of other discussions, data and information was brought up many, many different times. And I bring that up only from the fact that the work that all of you are doing in informatics and our discussions around this, I think are going to become even more important and more relevant as we go forward. I think we all recognize that, but I just wanted to point out that it is being recognized elsewhere. So at the same time, I'm not sure, just want to make sure everybody did see the memo come out from APTA, the APTA Outcomes Registry. Many of us may have been involved with those calls many years ago. Matt Elrod pulled several of us together, but the registry is going to be closing down as of March 31 of next year. And so I didn't know if there were comments on either of those topics from others, but I did want to open up to discussion around either of those first. Any feedback? And how many were involved in the registry?
I was.
I see a couple of hands, 3, 4. I know, Matt, you pulled most everybody together, and I know that there was a lot of stuff there. It just, I think we alluded to in the past, and others have mentioned that the registry was not a bi-directional product, was data coming in, and it did meet the MIPS requirement, and there's other ways that that's happening now. But I don't know. Go ahead. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Bob, was this predominantly a financial decision by APTA to close the registry? It just wasn't making money.
Stephen, I actually was going to ask if anybody had any insights about it, because I hadn't heard anything either.
Yeah, I got the call from Tara Jo. I was on the advisory panel, and then also we used it. I think financial was a big one. I think lack of adoption. There was just, frankly, they thought it was going to grow, and in fact, it constricted going forward to next year. So you had fewer participants than you did the year before. So it wasn't lack of growth, it was actually shrinking. And kind of to Bob's point, if you want to do MIPS, there were actually probably better ways to do MIPS than what the registry had. And the registry had so much more horsepower under the hood than MIPS, but it kind of hitched its pony to MIPS alone. And so I think that probably was its undoing. Yeah, it's unfortunate because it's a treasure trove of data that you could certainly have used to guide best practice and clinical practice guidelines and that sort of thing, but there just simply wasn't enough willing participants to get data in to make it viable. And my COO is the treasurer, so she played a large role in it, and they had to stop the bleeding at some point in time. It wasn't that it wasn't making enough money, it was losing a tremendous amount of money year over year. So
the only part I had heard about. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was just going to ask if there was any other plans to think about or collect information, or are there any thoughts about that kind of insight to gain from the profession? Again, I completely appreciate the fact that the registry wasn't providing any of those things that we had hoped initially it would, but you know, if there's any conversations about that from APTA or the need or interest in doing that.
I know that Mike Horsfield is very driven to find something. So from the PPS standpoint, to be able to build off of that, but there are no, at least to my understanding, no direct plans. And then Tara Jo basically left it at, we'll help you find another vendor, but we don't have any connection to any other vendors to use this data. So just as a service to you, we'll help connect you to other vendors, will help you participate in MIPS. But I don't see anything else coordinated. Others might.
I can tell that the only comments that I had heard, and it really didn't come up in discussions over the weekend, I wish it would have, but we didn't, but was just the comment that it needed to be bi-directional, and it wasn't, and they weren't willing to put the money forward to make that happen. And in other words, they weren't looking to improve the product even more because they didn't think they could get additional people. So
and Bob, when you say bi-directional, do you just mean having output of the data that they were collecting?
Meaning
Other
giving
than just the
something
MIPS
back,
reporting?
meaning giving something back to the people who were supplying all the data, something that they could use clinically that might help out with care. And that would have taken some improvements in the product to look at the data they had and then put information back out to, let's say I'm a customer and I'm sending my data into APTA to the registry. There was nothing really coming back to that person at the point of care to improve the clinical care. And that was what I think was the next step. Chris, you can probably talk to that a lot more.
Yeah, I think
But that was just a roundabout that I had heard.
Yeah, they gave data back. So you certainly had dashboards to help you succeed on the individual MIPS measures. Now, there was all kinds of hiccups in that dashboard actually working, but that philosophy was good. But I think that's something for us to consider as informaticists working in healthcare. Who's your consumer of your goods? And I do think that the registry and many other vendors miss it, that they'll give back a report on a quarterly basis. So you might be able to participate in some incentive program, fine. But to your point, Bob, really the true value is at the point of care, can you guide decision-making based on what I'm putting into your system? That is going to be much more valuable to a practitioner and a patient who are taking their time to give you the data. So, but can you give them something back?
Hey, Chris, so thanks for sharing this. This is really great information. I wonder if there's another alternative to repurpose all that data they've been collecting. I mean, to me, it's like, for research perspective, it's like, whatever data that you have, can we just explore it? You know, is there any type of discussion about that? Just de-identifying all of it. And then here we go. There's another data set.
Yeah, I don't know, Stephen, do you have any information on that? I mean, I know we have been doing a lot of work on the scientific advisory panel relative to data use requests. So anyone coming to the registry asking for data. So there is a process in place for that. Now, that's kind of null and void because there won't be new data, but I have no clue where the data is going to live and what the plans are to be able to get that out consumable by researchers or academies.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, I, not been on the scientific advisory panel for the last 2 years. So it was just the first 4 years that I was on. And yeah, that was part of it. We wanted people to have access. I mean, I think there was a cost for that, but now that, that was when it was active. So I don't know. I mean, I would assume that APTA owns that data. It's not, it's not FigMD or their vendors. But I'm not sure what the ability to access it is. And the other thing I'm not sure, Chris, I don't know if you know, is how complete the data set is, with people that submitted, what percent of the of their patients did they submit on so that, you know, they can't be a computer, they can't be accused of cherry picking, you know, that's an issue.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if we're any
that-
indication,
that's some of the issue I have is accuracy.
yeah, I'm with you. If we're any indication, they basically helped us get the exemption every year. If
Ah.
that's an indication. So we did not, we wanted to mass participate, but they couldn't deal with it because of all their database issues. So they basically helped us get an exemption every year. So I'm with you that the data is probably very incomplete. And you could probably mine it, wrangle it to get some inferences, but there's going to be a lot of questions in that data based on how it was collected.
So I'm wondering, related to that, and Chris, this might be something you or Stephen can talk with whomever would be appropriate. But Sam, as you mentioned, de-identifying the data and using it, and we've talked about finding some kind of a database that we could direct academians to, that so if it were all de-identified and we could have certain questions that they start looking through and asking of the database, just as a way to start training on informatics or educating or using it for some way. I know that isn't what it was designed for, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to, as you mentioned, Sam, repurpose it in a way, but I'm thinking of it from an educational perspective instead of other stuff, just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous potential value for DPT programs may not be affiliated with medical center or any particular, just they don't have a good way to collect that clinical data. I think that even just having a data set, here's a spreadsheet, here's a whole bunch of NEOAs and some of the other demographics and clinical information, you know, that would provide a really great outlet. But again, there's probably a very much strict, probably have to go through a whole lot of process to get there. From what I've seen so far and what I've engaged in some of the informal conversation with other academians, they're sort of doing this on their own, sort of on an isolated basis. They have their own data set they've been working through within their own institution. Even that itself could be a hurdle. So, but it's a great, really potential high value for something like that.
Yeah, I think this is wildly valuable. If you could have a curated data set that now you have rehab-minded machine learning experts that you say, here are the basic rehab questions. Here's a data set of typical stuff that you can ask questions of. Go ahead and write your algorithms against this. You know what you get back is going to be incomplete and not valid, but you now have trained your algorithms to a data set, and now you can look at other live data sets based on what you could do in a learning data set. This is how machine learning experts earn their chops, but there's no rehab data sets to do that. So is this complete enough? I just don't know. And frankly, though, who are you going to pay to curate it? Because that's going to be the process. It's got to be cleaned and have a data dictionary in place that's readable by machines and people. There's a cost and time associated to that.
So if I
Chris,
could offer a suggestion about a both and situation here. Everything you've all said is right, in my opinion, because I've drunk the same Kool-Aid you have where this topic is concerned. And there were academicians out there, researchers who also are in that same headspace because they have individual research agendas that also depend on access to this kind of information. The and for me, and the biggest headwind I see in all of this, it actually isn't figuring out the logistics of getting a data set and the money to support it. It's the attitude. It's the attitude. Our colleagues don't care. By and large, in my opinion, they don't care. They don't see the value in what this information could do for them. So they don't ask good questions. We've got to figure out a way to influence that mindset while we're busy trying to sort out the logistics, or all this effort still won't be put to good use. Which I realize sounds like a Debbie Downer, but this is for me out in the practice community. This is, closed health systems or practices like the one Mike Horsfield leads or Intermountain or whatever that have leadership adoption of these things and have the, not just the influence, but the power to say, you know what, this is how we're going to practice and this is how we're going to gather information, use information, enter information. They are certainly the leaders there, but I feel like it's a both and kind of challenge we face is how to make that more generalizable so that people aren't just saying, oh yeah, there's data out there. They're like, wow, where can I get my hands on that data?
Well, and I think that maybe speaks to Bob's point about the potential use of this for educational purposes, right? If we try to link some of this data to what's being taught in PT programs from an educational standpoint, you can start to change those attitudes and start putting people out there who do care about the data. But I think that's probably a really good idea if we can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, this is a great point. So CAPTI updated some of their requirements, and I'm not in academia on the PT side, but I did have a couple programs reach out to me because they knew I did informatics and say, hey, can you help us? Because we have, and maybe Sam, you can speak to this, we have to speak to informatics. It's part of our accreditation now, but we frankly don't know where to go. So what should we do? I think we can help guide them in that.
Yeah, and I'll just add kind of anecdotally, I just got done with my faculty search. I am one of the academia people, and there's a lot of interest kind of at higher levels of education on this type of work, but none of them know how to do it. And so getting people into the faculty who have these types of interests and can lead this type of teaching, I think will be really helpful.
I know that, again, from the APTA meeting over the weekend, CAPTI representative talked about how right now they're in the middle of a process of looking at the CAPTI certification reimagined, and they're going through an entire process with that and accepting feedback and et cetera. Some of you may be very aware of that, but again, it's in process. And part of what they're talking about is how do we prepare for teaching for 10 and 20 years down the road, practice in that framework versus teaching for the therapists who are practicing today. Because if they're teaching for the therapists practicing today, by the time they graduate, they're already behind in the process. So it may be something to address there. Go ahead, Dion, looked like you were ready to say.
Well, just in response to all of that and also to make my apologies because I'm going to have to go in a minute. It occurs to me that maybe a strategy to wrap all of this up in that we might think about is along the lines of demonstration projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that in part because it, for me at least conceptually, even though I haven't thought about it practically, scales down the effort a bit. But also it means recruiting people who are already heading in this direction and helps organize them and us around these kinds of things so that it's not all schools, it's not all practices, it's these schools and those practices and these academicians and these clinicians in a more purposeful way. That maybe that might help us figure out how to do this from a practical perspective.
I think that's a really good point, Dion, is as we know these are happening, use of data, collection of data in a way that can be usable, and then reintroduction back into practice of what that is, that whole cycle. The more we can curate examples of that happening in our profession here, and then help others learn to do it and learn the lessons for making it happen would be very valuable.
I do want to give Matt Elrod a chance. Matt, your hand's been up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that so you guys know I'm on the pages of all of you. I am
A little bit louder, Matt, if you can. Sorry.
Yeah, no, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that one is there any interest in, does APTA have any interest in this, or is this something that we're going to need to do totally on our own? I'm too far removed to know the answer to that question, or even. But if there is some interest there, I think it would be wise to coordinate that.
I think that I can check with some people at APTA. I think that if others have connections, And Chris, since you're close with the registry, if you can bring up through the group there that at least there's a discussion around what might be able to happen to at least make some value out of the data that has been collected. I think that's a great way to go forward. Let's continue that. And Sam, let's keep that on the discussion for next month. And just so everybody knows, the meeting appointment should be a monthly one. So we have this on the schedule now. I apologize for not getting it on there sooner. After our last call, I just had a couple things, but anyway, we
And
have
Bob,
it
I'm
on the
gonna throw-
schedule now and we're going
I was gonna
forward.
throw-
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
And,
Yeah, I was going to throw one last thing out there is that to Chris's point about using computer processable information and data, I mean, there's an enormous opportunity now that the United States data set, the USCDI, now has functioning in it as a data element, which basically what that means, the federal government is now saying that eventually computers are going to have to be able to share in a meaningful way information about functioning. That's huge. And that gives us a huge opportunity to make sure that we get the right information that computers can use and understand to be shared. And Bob and I sit on these calls a lot, and speech language pathology, they're all over this right now. But APTA as a representative body's not. There's PTs that are interested and involved in it, but not APTA as a representative body. So I continue to say I think there's this opportunity to help put out these quote unquote data standards for their profession to where we can get these siloed groups to start communicating using computer processable information that can then be used for educational purpose, research purpose, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The one limitation is most PT EHRs are excluded from the USCDI requirement right now. So they would have to, basically we do it, we're part of a bigger EHR system, or Stephen would be able to because they're part of a physician-based, hospital-based EHR, but most PT data would be siloed out for now. But in 5-10 years, yeah, they're probably gonna have to get brought in.
I
Yeah,
think
and
something else
I mean-
that's I think something else that's going to influence that, unless there's a delay on October 6th with the information blocking rule, it's the designated record set that has to be shared. So anything that you maintain and what you determine to be your designated record set in your EHR has to be able to be shared electronically in a way that could be machine readable. Doesn't mean that we have the standards set up that it immediately goes into other data sets, but at least it starts to be shared. And I think that over time that will get better. And that doesn't matter if you have a certified EHR or not. So it does start to move forward. Chris, looked like you had a follow-up there, sorry.
No, I think that's totally accurate. Again, the only problem is in federal government and their infinite wisdom. And to make it easier on us, there are so many exceptions to that requirement right now that even though it's implemented, you can find the exception du jour to get away from it. So yeah, like you said, it'll be a while and we need to push to clear the exemptions, but also not negatively impact the practices that don't have an EHR that can do it. So there's a buildup.
So as we talk about standards, one of the topics that we had here, which I think is an opportunity for this group to discuss through, maybe on the website, discuss further, have others been on the acute care listserv where they've been discussing the levels of assistance and some of the feedback back and forth on this? So I'm seeing some head shake no. Sam, if I can share my screen just for a moment, you have
Yeah.
part of it here, but I wanna, and I can pass this around to the group as well if we want. But in essence, share screen. So in essence, and let me move this out of the way, make this a little bit bigger. So there was a discussion and I removed names and stuff from this, but it started out with one person who's in an Epic system and they are looking at changing their system so that it's more standardized. And they were asking what others are doing in terms of max assist of 2, max assist, mod assist, min assist. What does it mean? What do people put, etc. And so the discussion went back and forth multiple times. It was interesting to see how many different answers there were. And again, I can send this out to the group, which might make it even easier. I did put in a comment. So there were comments about putting it 75, 50, 50 to 75, and then putting how many therapists and et cetera. I shared information related to section GG. Rick Black, I know what you and I both know that very well. There's others that may understand from the post-acute care area, but this is the language from CMS, what they require from us, and it goes through the same kind of information. But my big comment that when I posted was that, you know, we couldn't come to an agreement, so CMS went through and defined it for us, and we have to use their definitions for, I think there's 14 items, Rick, in section GG between mobility and activities of daily living. But where I come from all of this is you can see the different comments back and forth from others. Matt Elrod had some from the ICF perspective, but I'm going to stop sharing now at this point. What I wanted to do was to see if there's a way that this group can come to an agreement. It doesn't mean everybody changes to it right now, but similar to the Model Practice Act that APTA came out with, that if people in rehab informatics are looking to have a standard and they're trying to put it forward, that we can give a best recommendation on a go forward basis, some kind of a best recommended practice guide. And I thought that this might be one area to begin to talk through and discuss, and maybe I don't expect it to be answered in the next 20 minutes. I'm not that optimistic, right? But I do think that we have a group of individuals here who might be able to discuss it at multiple levels. And if we can come up with the best practice guideline for a step like this, then maybe there's other steps that we can also come up with the best practice guideline. And again, similar to a Model Practice Act, just that people say, okay, this is what we can put in our EMR, vendor agnostic EMR, but put it in place so that we can begin to get closer to a standardized language across the profession. Thoughts along that idea, and is this something we can discuss further on the website, or do we discuss it further here, or what are your thoughts? I know several of us already have systems put in place and built in, and again, I'm not trying to change everything overnight, but how do we, there's a lot of people who are updating, right? How do we get to a similar
Rick, I'd love
language?
to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead, Matt.
I want to hear Rick's thoughts.
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm kind of partial to the data from section GG, and the reason being that CMS over the years has put a lot of work into developing those data elements, and now they're implemented in all of the post-acute care environments. So you've got a lot of different environments collecting the same data set, which I think is really powerful. I mean, you know, there are advantages and disadvantages, right? But those, for what they're designed for, to look at large patient populations, I think they work well. So I know, yeah, I'm doing actually some research looking at our own section GG information and building a large data set from within our healthcare system and doing some research on that. So again, I am kind of biased towards the section GG items just because I know them pretty well. But I think that it's a good place to start. again, because there's a lot of data out there in many different environments using those data items.
All right, everybody else has something built into their system for levels of assistance, right? What does this bring forward? Even the discussion about it. Can we come up with some kind of a best practice guideline for levels of assistance if you're updating your EMR?
Well, Matt has experience with this, right? SNOMED is going to be your background thesaurus to be able to put those in, right? And so if we can get SNOMED codes for those, or specifically LOINC codes for those things, I don't know if there are those already, but if there are, that's where EHRs eventually are going to have to go for their standards. Otherwise, you're going to have to require a de facto standard of EHR vendors, and that frankly is not going to work. You're going to have to strong arm them into it. But if you have a standard codified in LOINC and SNOMED, now as they try to go forward and become certified EHRs, they're going to have to subscribe to that standard.
I can share that all the section GG codes do have LOINC codes associated. And I know that part of that process, and Matt, you can talk through that further, but that was part of the early on process that CMS did with their data element library. But again, all of this comes out of the Impact Act, and it affects all 4 post-acute care settings. As I understand from the Impact Act, and Rick, you can add more to this if you want, but the night before that was passed, the acute hospitals were pulled out of that language. And the reason that they were pulled out is it wouldn't have passed the Senate otherwise. And it did pass with a big majority. And so the Impact Act went into effect without hospitals, acute care hospitals included through most of it, but it is included in one of the back sections. So anyway, just back color there. I'll put in the language in case others haven't seen it related to section GG.
And I'll say that I think it'd be easy, relatively easy for us to put something out that talked about what data standards to use and ways to look at different things, and how to collect things in a standardized way. The question is going to be adoption of that. And, you know, maybe to Dion's point, that if we just start getting a group of people to say, hey, that makes sense, let's just start doing it and get on board with it, that maybe that's a place to start.
Yeah, you're going to need to get people who have leverage over their EHR vendors. So it's great if small practices want to do it, but until you get your EHR vendor to write their templates to require it, the adoption's easy when it's required of your providers. So they're going to have to lean on their EHR vendors if they don't already conform to that standard.
I'm not going to put it in chat. I am going to send out this Word document to everybody, though. I just can't copy and paste in there, sorry.
And I'm going to need to apologize. I need to get to another call. Appreciate the conversation, appreciate the discussion, and look forward to continuing to follow you.
And I would just add, and I guess we all know this on the call, but when there is standardized language that our profession has adopted in some way, that's exactly what our large EHR vendors are looking for. They would love to have something that's standard that their customers actually need and would use, rather than everyone having a one-off or a slightly different version. So having it in that standard, you know, means we don't have to strong arm as much as just advocate for.
And I can speak for my company. Back in 2019, we worked with our EHR vendor so that we built in the section GG items and the language, using exactly the language from CMS as part of our therapy evaluations. And so that way we're capturing the section GG information and doing our evaluations at the same time. So in previously, you know, there had always been a parallel process between the evaluation and then whatever outcome measures we were using at the time. And that always led to, I thought, problems with the quality of the data, because it's hard to, you know, to force people to do two separate measurement systems at the same time. And so we just made it consistent. And then obviously these are measures that are made for looking at populations. So at the patient level, they're not as sensitive. So you need to supplement that with other objective measures. And we have those built into the EHR. But that's something that we did back in, I think, in 2019.
So does that imply that maybe if there's a best practice guideline, that maybe it shows the global first and explains that this is for the population data? If you're looking at more detailed at a patient level, add these items in? Because that sounds like what you've done, Rick. So it's not a either or, it is this and this, but this at a base minimum.
This would be an ontology. So I think this is something we probably would want to bring Dan Vreeman in. This is what he did for years.
Steve Wilkinson as well. So
yeah. So I think that concept of building that hierarchical ontology, that's what we would need to think about.
Steve, you have something to add to that?
Sorry, I'm somewhat I'm dealing with two things at once. I apologize. I've kind of been in and out of the conversation. So I totally agree with what Chris is saying and what you're saying, Bob. I worry a little bit about the two separate thing. You know, that's just another thing to add. I think one would be better than 1+1 kind of thing, but certainly I love the idea of building ontology. I've been talking about it for a long time, you know, so I love the conversation, and I think it's absolutely something that I think this group could and should be doing. And again, I apologize for being off screen, etc. I'm phone calls, etc. So apologize.
It's all good. So if we can at least discuss this further on the website, or if there's a smaller group that is interested in addressing this further. But it's something that I think that we could do that would begin to move us forward and would certainly give some respect to what we're doing together. So Kelly, thoughts there?
I think you've covered it well. Nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay. Sam, that ends that discussion. Go back to you. Sorry.
No, it's good. This is really rich conversation. We got about 11 minutes, and I think jotting down some of the take-home message for us and then bring it back to this group next month. But I want to make sure that we have some opportunity to hear other interests, certainly beyond the ones that we talked about, that you would like to bring forward to this group. And I don't think we need to necessarily have a breakout group, but maybe within the next few minutes or so, and then we can bring that, and maybe that could be another offline group. So I want to leave that time for us here.
I'll jump in with 2 topics, then others, and just share any other things that you have going on or other stuff that you're aware of. One that I have to share, there's a Medicare Advantage request for information that is out there right now, and the responses or comments are due by the end of August. I bring this forward because if any of you in your systems are dealing with the extreme lack of standardization between what are they, Rick, 3,833 or 2,833 there's well over 2,500 different Medicare Advantage plans. And if any of you are dealing with the differences that they have with their prior authorization processes or their post treatment review processes, or with their documentation submission processes, or their appeal standardization processes, those are some of the things that I would encourage you to make comments about. And from an informatics perspective, you know, when we talk about standardization going on with the US CDI and et cetera, but when there's no standardization amongst any of these payers, it's just ridiculous, in my opinion. So if others are dealing with any challenges with the Medicare Advantage at any time, especially anything related to standardization, that's one thing I would encourage you certainly to share. And then a separate topic, Chris, there was and I forget his name right now, was looking for data related to workers' compensation. Do you remember that topic? And
yeah, I just think data sets in workers' comp that so I think Matusi is what you're thinking of.
Yep.
Basically, are there data sets in workers' compensation that we can use to try to predict either injury or off work time, do some predictive analyses on, but we're just unaware if there are data sets out there that already exist.
So either of those topics or any other topics anybody has, or any upcoming conferences, et cetera, that you are aware of. Oh, I will add one more, sorry. The APTA Physical Therapy, Academy of Physical Therapy Research held their retreat. It's been about 3 weeks ago, just outside of Boston. And it actually all was related to digital health. And they really talked a lot about data that is being pulled in, looking at data from different perspectives. But there was one individual, Sam, from your university, who was looking at big data sets. And he's basically their group is trying to pull research in from all the different researchers that are out there, but going back to the core research itself and just pulling in the numbers and the data elements that were looked at. And then they're trying to look at stuff from a big data perspective instead of from each individual study. So it was kind of intriguing to hear him talk a bit, but quite fascinating. Anyway, others I'm sure have things going on. Go ahead. I'm going to go on mute for a few.
I just throw out there, I did get a bit of a peek behind the curtain on a large insurance company, health insurance company here in the Midwest. And as we're not using informatics as a profession the way we should be, the insurance companies sure are. And when we can't figure out why they're not authorizing more care or they're dictating certain things, they've got all the data in the world to back them up, and we don't really have a standardized set, or we don't have data to use against them in the right way. So if we're looking for motivation to get the profession on board with participating, getting paid and payer restrictions and payers dictating care versus, I think Bob, you said it earlier, we couldn't come up with guidelines, so CMS did. I dream of a day where we could flip that a bit and say, no, we have all the data. And they're not concerned about the minute details that we are as clinicians. They're using the big data to make their decisions. And it'd be helpful if we as this group could kind of lead that charge for the profession to get on board with, let's flip the tables a bit and collect the data so that we can start fighting with loaded ammunition, I guess, good ammunition to go back at them.
Brian, if I could comment on that, it's great. It's a great point, Kelly. And when you see the insurance companies like Optum and others, they can see total number of visits to treat certain different diagnostic categories. They can see what that means for cost and whether that person actually ended up having to access additional health care or not. It's all in. And we should care about that bigger picture quite a bit more. And it isn't into the minutia. Those are big picture costs and they matter. access to those things is tough, but we certainly need to understand where we fit in. And we can be compared directly apples to apples by others, including chiropractors. And what really are the outcomes from a perspective of a payer. It's important. So again, if we're just sitting still and standing by and allowing it to happen, it's happening to us. We can talk all about being leaders in healthcare, but we're not really, if we aren't understanding what that perspective is and truly partnering with insurance companies so that we can see where we're most effective and where we need to improve.
I totally agree. I mean, I see a really powerful perspective piece out of this conversation. But I also see that this is not at all like discussed from an educational standpoint. I remember like when I had students in the clinic, they came out and I was like, oh, that's a pre-auth patient. And they were like, what is that? And I'm in academia now and we're still not talking about it. We're not talking about how like the financial aspect at all. But we're also not talking about how the insurance companies are looking at this data and how what we are documenting is impacting that.
So that's a great point, Madeline. I think to add to your point, I'm interested in developing learners to connect individual perspective care to population health perspective. I think we talked a lot about that already, but whether you are going to internally use a spreadsheet or a dashboard, I'm currently working on a project with residents, teaching, integrating, infusing, if you will, high value care. Talk about cost is really a boring, dry topic for a lot of PTs, PT students. But when we put some data in front of them, especially some of the outcome measures that deals with more of a population health level, like quality of life measures, rather than those specific legacy measures, you have a lot of interesting conversations on barriers. I'm very much interested in how do we strategically bring that up, infusing informatics in our education. And I'm doing that with the residency. I'd love to share a little bit with Kelly about this conversation, but I'm open to any conversation related to that.
I know we're right at the top of the hour. And I do like having these additional conversations. And we will pick them up next month, but I do hope, please, between now and then on the website, we can get some of this going and talk a bit more. I know when we talk about outcomes from the pop health, that's one thing. I do know that some folks are using outcomes at a patient detail level and are already influencing insurance companies. So maybe we can talk further about that on the next call, or if, whatever. I know some of it's starting to happen, but we have to do it more in our profession. We do. So.
Perfect timing, Bob. You got a minute left.
Right.
Thank you, all of you.
And I don't want to, but I would just say, Bob, stick a pin in it, because if we have case examples that are shareable related to this, I think it would be good, and it may help folks understand why this matters and where this information really fits in to their world, so to speak. So great job. It's really great to have everybody on this call today.
Thank you, Kelly, and
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Have a great day, and we do have it on the schedule for next month. And it's okay to invite others and also to send the form to others too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, Bob. If we could stay a little bit longer on this call, just to follow up.
Sure, I can do that.
Maybe you can stop recording on this, and then we'll probably need to edit some of the recording.